1970s, the fourth king of Bhutan, an absolute monarch, drew international attention by commenting that gross national happiness was more important than gross national product. His government steadfastly pursued that objective for the next 3 decades. The king eventually concluded that the pursuit of gross national happiness required a transition to democracy, and in 2008, the Honourable Jigme Yoser Thinley took office as the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Bhutan. The Thinley government remains dedicated to gross national happiness and to managing a thoughtful engagement with the modern world, an engagement that brings improvements in areas like health and education while preserving Bhutan's ancient culture and protecting its magnificent environment. If it succeeds, it will be an example to the world. In many ways, it already is. The Honourable Jigme Yoser Thinley, Prime Minister of Bhutan. Prime Minister, thank you very much for doing this interview. I wanted to begin by asking you if you could explain briefly for people who aren't familiar with it, what the gross national happiness framework is, and then I want to talk a little bit about the environment.
Thank you. Well, gross national happiness is the conceptual framework that has guided Bhutan's development process ever since our previous king, His Majesty the Fourth King, came to the throne. That was in 1972. It is based on the belief that the aspiration and the main desire of every human individual is to pursue happiness and find happiness. And that happiness, on the other hand, is a state of mind that one is able to achieve only if there were an equitable balance, an equilibrium between fulfilling the needs of the body and fulfilling the needs of the mind. And on the other hand, what we have seen and what we see globally is a macroeconomic model that has promoted purely economic growth at the cost of spiritual and emotional well-being. Now here in Bhutan, under this philosophy of gross national happiness, we have, the government has assumed the responsibility of creating enabling conditions for individual citizens to pursue happiness. And this is being undertaken, or has been undertaken all these years, through what we commonly refer to as the 4 pillars of G&H. These are, number 1, sustainable and equitable socio-economic development. 2, conservation of our very fragile Himalayan ecology. 3, preservation and promotion of our cultural heritage. And 4, good governance. Now these 4 pillars, in fact the 4 strategies based on which government development projects and programs are designed and implemented. More recently, these 4 pillars have been further broken down into 9 domains, and these 9 domains into some 72 variables, all of which can be measured, quantified. And now the government programs and policies have to be screened to see whether whether a policy, a project, or a program are G&H neutral, G&H sensitive, G&H positive also, and if a project or a program is G&H neutral or G&H negative, then we try to see how best we can enrich that program from the G&H point of view. So that in a nutshell is gross national happiness for you.
So the whole filter through which you do all the work of government all passes through the filter of gross national happiness.
This is a recent decision that we have taken, yes.
Wonderful. Now what does that imply in terms of the environment? You mentioned the fragility of the Himalayan environment, but you've done pretty well at keeping it intact thus far, I believe.
Well, because of our conscious pursuit of gross national happiness and realizing that happiness cannot be achieved without a stable environment, without an ecology that is balanced, especially given the fragile nature of the Himalayas, we have been able to achieve a green cover that is far more than it was when we first began development, modernization in 1961. I think green cover at that time was something like 45%. From there, we have achieved a forest cover, not green, but a forest cover of 72%. And today, we are, as I have just declared today, and as I have pledged on behalf of the people of Bhutan to COP15 in Copenhagen, Denmark, Bhutan will always be carbon neutral. Bhutan will always have the sequestration capacity to absorb the carbon, the greenhouse gases emitted by other countries. Today, we are emitting no more than 1/3 of our own sequestration capacity.
Really? So you're absorbing 2/3?
That's right.
From other countries. And do I understand that you've just brought in a policy that you're going to give away bicycles in Thimphu?
Yes, even though we as yet do not have any traffic jams in the country, we still feel that given the fragility of the vulnerability of our ecology, and also given our very strong ethical environment, ethical sense, we want, and to prevent, of course, ultimately, facing a situation where we will have traffic congestion and excessive pollution. We have now, the government has taken a policy decision to try and encourage people to look for alternative ways of transporting oneself, moving from one place to another. And to begin with, we are going to be distributing some bicycles to those people who will sign an undertaking that they will walk to work and from work to home, and preferably even do their Sunday shopping on bicycle. Ultimately, the hope is that we will build and promote a pedestrian culture, a bicycle or a pedestrian culture here in Thimphu.
Which must have been a pedestrian culture until fairly recently.
You see, we are a highly adaptive people. We adapt to change very quickly. Bhutanese, I think, are perhaps one of the rare people who have not suffered from disorientation due to change. And it is this that worries me. And so before they adapt too much and get too used to the not so good ways of life, we want to ensure that we can return to the pedestrian way of life, which is still within the memory of most people in the country.
Yeah. Now, do you have other environmental measurable goals that you're hoping to achieve? You've mentioned the 70% of forest and your intention to keep enough forest to sequester all the carbon and more. Are there other similar goals like that?
Well, there are many goals, but I should tell you that the 72% that we have achieved has a lot to do with His Majesty the King, before democracy came in, having dedicated a little over 1/3 of the country to conserved and protected areas, as such. And recently, soon after my government was established, we again marked and committed a huge area as the Centennial Park, marking the 100 years of monarchy in our country. And together now we have a total of some 52% of protected areas in our country. We intend to ensure that the very rich biodiversity, the flora as well as the fauna, which are all recorded or are all, are all recorded, we want to ensure that there will be no loss of the biodiversity. There are, again, similarly, commitments to ensure that our rivers stay clean. And these are all measurable targets. And with respect to any development project or program, whether in the government, public sector, or whether in the private sector, all these have to go through the environment assessment, impact assessment in a process. And so no activity can take place unless and until environmental clearance is obtained, and then they are subjected to very stringent rules and regulations and monitored very, very closely.
This sounds like a really remarkable regime that you've set up. I sensed from some of the remarks you made during the workshop we've been both attending that you saw the country as having quite a narrow window in which to entrench some of these things. That you were fearful that these things could be turned backwards and that Bhutan could become accessible to exploitation if action were not taken in a fairly short period of time. Is that?
That is correct. As I said, we are a people that is, who are very vulnerable to change because of our highly adaptive nature, and so even with respect to this workshop that is now taking place, this national workshop that is taking place on how best we can infuse and embed GNH values in our education system, is being held. It's very, very timely, and we want to ensure that the knowledge, the recommendations, and the ideas that are generated at this workshop lead to very clear, specific strategies, projects, and programs that can be implemented, so that within the next 3 years, we will have in our education system a very highly GNH value-laden curriculum.
And your fear would be that if that were not the case, that this moment when you are moving in this, I think, quite wonderful direction that's a beacon to the rest of the world, you could lose that.
Yes, that is our fear. Yeah. Changes are taking place so rapidly, and these are accelerating by the day, by the month, and year. And not only Bhutan, in fact, I think the whole world needs to understand that really we do not have much more time left for us to reorient our way of life to a way of life that is more sustainable, that is more responsible to ourselves and to future generations. I think the climate change is a worrying sign that the nature cannot continue to absorb the kind of abuses that we are throwing at it, that the world is finite, natural resources are finite, that growth economic growth cannot continue to take place, that it will come at considerable cost to this generation and generations in the future. I think it is time that the world understood that if we talk about growth, we should talk about growth as with a different understanding. A growth of the human individual, a growth of the mind, and growth of happiness. I think it is time that we considered even looking at our objectives in life in terms of becoming more prosperous as nations, rich as individuals, looking at what really constitutes wealth, what is prosperity, and what is being rich. I think these have to be understood more in human terms, in terms of relationships, and in an ecological sense. I think we don't have much time, and that's why I worry about what might be the outcome of COP15 in Copenhagen, and I worry also as to how much the people around the world, leaders, politicians, corporate leaders, academics, scientists, journalists, economists, will listen to and pay attention to this growing interest in an alternative way of life. And GNH does provide an alternative development paradigm that is more sustainable and that is holistic. And that tries indeed to redefine growth and wealth.
Now, I sometimes think of the world as having worked its way into a blind corner, and there are one or two little places where you can see a way out, and one of those places is Bhutan. And there are a few other places around the world that are seriously thinking about this, but thank goodness that that's the case. You have a specific problem in Bhutan having to do with the glaciers in the Himalayas, right? Which is something that is coming to you from the rest of the world. It's not something that you're responsible for.
We have several thousand glacier-fed lakes and several thousand glaciers as well. We are part of the Himalayan ecology, and it is in the Himalayan mountain system that there exist several, maybe 52,000 glacier lakes, and an equal number of glaciers as well, and we are in fact referred to as collectively. I think the Himalayas have something in the region of some 40,000 square miles of ice, and hence we are referred to as the third polar region. But I think the third polar region in the not too distant future will become more of a metaphor or a legend, especially since global warming is now fast leading to the rapid melting of the glaciers, and leading to more and more volumes of water being poured into the glacier-fed lakes that are contained within loose moraine walls. And when I say loose moraine walls, quite a bit of it is actually cemented by ice. So as the atmosphere is warming up, as the ice, mortar, is melting, and as the pressure on these moraine walls are increasing, we have the threat of these lakes bursting, and thereby causing what is known as the GLOF phenomenon, which is glacial lake outburst floods. Now, glacial lake outburst floods, GLOFs, have been occurring more frequently, not only in this region, but globally. And this very occasional phenomenon is now a reality that populations, especially in the mountain regions, are beginning to face, leading to devastation of agricultural farmland, of human settlements, and expensive real estate, and all kinds of infrastructural facilities. Here in Bhutan, almost all our rivers have their origins in the glaciers and the glacial-fed lakes. And already we've had some minor incidents. We worry that if glacial lakes, if climate change, global warming continues at this pace, which will certainly result in all the glaciers in the Himalayas melting within 25 years, at most 30 years from now, we will have all kinds of devastations for that period, and then thereafter our rivers will run dry for most times in the year, and they will be calamitous floods during the summer, and life will become difficult, which then means, this is from the Bhutanese point of view, but Bhutan is just one of the small areas, one of the areas in this large region that is sustained by the Himalayas. In fact, I'm referring to China on the other side, the Mekong Delta region, Southeast Asia, and then I'm talking about India. Together, we're talking about almost 45 to 50% of the global population that could thirst, and life sustainability could be a huge challenge for these people. It's terrifying, yes.
It's a terrifying possibility. And, you know, it has become clearer and clearer to me as I've thought about environmental issues that equity is a big, big piece of this whole thing. I mean, it is not Bhutan that's causing the melting, but it's you who will get the,
That's right.
the brunt of it.
That's right.
The same thing's true with the Pacific Islands and so on. And nothing could more underline the fact that we're all one people in one single little world. Is it the case that Bhutan seems to be sensitive to a lot of these things because of its Buddhist heritage? It seems to me that there's a sort of a reverence for the natural world that's built into Buddhism that must make it, this whole outlook, much more sympathetic for you than it might be for some other people.
Well, that is certainly one reason. You know, Buddhism is a religion, and likewise many other religions do also espouse the same values, and that is learning to live in harmony with the environment, which includes not only other human beings, but all sentient beings and all forms of life. And Buddhism, as practiced in Bhutan, with all kinds of legends and mythologies and so on, and superstitions, we respect nature. And we do realize that living in harmony with nature is surviving, is survival. And that, in fact, is the truth. If we fail to live in harmony with nature, then Bhutan could easily become a Himalayan desert. And we could end up refugees, ecological, environmental refugees, looking for livelihood in an already overpopulated Indo-Gangetic plains.
Mm. Yeah, but it seems to me that you respond really well to this crisis because Buddhism gives you a kind of a resource to turn back to intellectually. You haven't looked at the world ever as a machine, as a mechanistic kind of thing. It's always been vital and alive. Is that fair to say?
That's right. The humility that Buddhism preaches, and as I said, that other religions do also. Other religions also, I think, if we study them carefully, if you study them with humility, I think teach the best of human practices. And one of them is living in harmony with nature. I want to convey that it is not only because we are Buddhists that we have felt the need to live in harmony with nature, but it's also because we are human beings. Yes. And I think, and what Buddhism does is that Buddhism does make us accept the reality and the truth that we are only one among the many forms of life. Yet we are a form of life that has the enormous responsibility of having the capacity to liberate other forms of life. That we have a greater sense of responsibility to other forms of life that depend on our actions, that are affected by our actions.
For better or for worse. Tell me about the workshop that we've been doing, where you've gathered this distinguished group of educators to talk about how to infuse G&H values into the school curriculum. Are you happy with the way that's gone, and what sorts of
Extremely
outcomes?
happy. I'm extremely happy for several reasons. One reason is that I did not expect such a response. I did not expect that so many of these eminent, distinguished individuals would actually make themselves available to solve the issues, if you will, or problems or challenges that is faced by such a small country in a remote part of this world. To such people having come to the country, the kind of and the way in which the workshop has been structured and facilitated, it has generated a tremendous amount of, firstly, enthusiasm on the part of these distinguished scholars, and secondly, through this enthusiasm, generated so much of insight, knowledge, and understanding. These people are bringing not only knowledge and research, findings, but they are actually bringing in also their experiences in having, addressed and having dealt with some of the issues and the challenges that we are now only beginning to face. This workshop, as I have requested the various participants, is not a workshop where people have come together to share what they have, what they have written or what they have done. It's not a workshop of statements, where people make statements. It is a genuine workshop where people come together looking at, studying various issues, and then hammering out ways and means, bringing in, various ideas, synthesizing these ideas, and hammering out solutions that the Bhutanese education system can adopt and implement right away.
And are they coming with the kinds of suggestions that you would hope that they would come with? Or?
Yes. We have received very good suggestions in terms of how generally GNH values can be infused into our education system by way of the formal curricula, meaning then teaching of maths, GNH ways, how to promote GNH values while teaching maths. Likewise, geography, history, literature, social sciences, and so on. And then how can we develop a system for assessing not only the actual content of the subject, but also how much of an imbibing of GNH has taken place during the process of learning. Assessment, evaluation, monitoring. We've looked at informal education, non-formal education, GNH values through these processes, how to again infuse GNH ways of rewarding, of promoting social interaction between students, teacher and students, and how, in fact, a GNH school should be administered. So all these have been discussed, and very, very practical recommendations and ideas have emerged out of this workshop.
What will be the next steps if we now have all this brew of ideas?
The very next step will be for the Bhutanese participants at the workshop to get together, I think about 9 days from now, and then structure another workshop for the principals of all our schools in the country. They will come together in 3 separate groups, within January. During this is the vacation period for schools. And within this vacation period, they will then, using the material that has been developed by these people here after the workshop, they will then consider all the recommendations that have been made, that have come out of this workshop, and see how they can begin implementing, how they can begin delivering the content that has been generated. And the idea is that the principals will go back from these workshops, 3 workshops, and of course these workshops are going to be participant oriented, and not so much of a process where they're going to be told what has been developed and what has come out of the workshop, and now it is their duty to do this. But rather, they will have to decide and select firstly which of those recommendations they should implement and how best these could be implemented, because they know better than we administrators and policymakers sitting here in the Education Ministry.
Do you think they'll be at all resistant? Because you're right. Often principals and teachers are told this is the way it's going to be.
Resistance, I do not foresee at all,
no?
And it will not be there, because I know that there isn't a single Bhutanese who does not subscribe to GNH. I think what will happen in these workshops for the principals is an acknowledgement on the part of the royal government that the principals, that our teachers have the ability to impart GNH education, that they more than us know what GNH values really constitute.
You feel the teachers have that already?
Yes, yes. So what will happen is they will have now the resources to enhance their capacity, to be able to share with the students, to be able to impart what they know, and also bring to the conscious level what is there at the subconscious level. Bring to the formal process what has never been requested of them by the system till now. So I think they will be happy, and I think they will feel challenged.
Yes. And your sense of it is that this is all latent in them anyway, that this is in a certain sense making them articulate what they already know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, if this all succeeds, what will we, yeah, we're both looking at our watch here. But if this is all successful, how will Bhutan be different in, say, 10 years or 15 years? What do you foresee as being, what would we see if we were to be able to transport ourselves forward and look at the country at that point?
10 years from now? 5 years from now? 20 years from now? What I would like to see happening in Bhutan is, firstly, an education system that is quite different from the conventional, factory where certain knowledge and capabilities are imparted, where children are just turned out to become economic animals, thinking only for themselves, and working and earning for themselves. I would like to be able to see an education system that is truly educational, that will be able to bring out and produce graduates that are more human beings, with human values, that place and give importance to relationships, to students that are equiliterate, that are contemplative, that are analytical in terms of how they approach issues, challenges, even new knowledge, and basically people who will know and understand, appreciate that their needs as individuals are not really excessive. That it is not, it is that that success in life does not mean acquisition of wealth. That success in life is a state of being when one can come home at the end of the day satisfied with what one has done, being able to put your head on your pillow and have a sound sleep and dream, perhaps, or wake up the next day realizing that you are a happy individual, not only because you have found happiness for yourself, but because you have given happiness in the process, in the process of this one day's work that you have done, happiness to your spouse, to your children, to your family, to your neighbors, and to the world at large. Happy beings.
The Honourable Jigme Yoser Thinley, Prime Minister of Bhutan. This interview is part of a whole Bhutanese package on the Green Interview, which also includes a short documentary about this wonderful little country and an extended interview with Dr. Ronald Coleman, Bhutan's advisor on the implementation of gross national happiness. We've also posted on the Green Interview website Bhutan's Green Schools Manual, as well as its manual on the use of meditation in the country's classrooms. If you enjoyed this interview, you'll probably want to look at those other materials. For the Green Interview, I'm Silver Donald Cameron. See you next time.